So this is the first of a couple of comparisons that I have for the Lewitt LCT 040 match small diaphragm condenser microphone, and seeing if it is good considering the price compared to known standards in that field. Welcome back to the Rebel Tech channel. I'm Justin, and in this video we're going to be comparing two small diaphragm condenser microphones, the Lewitt LCT 040 match and the Oktava MK012. Now, for this test, I am only using the cardioid polar pattern for the Oktava because the Lewitt only has a cardioid polar pattern, just to be fair, but know that there are two more options, at least. There might be more, but I know there's two more options that I have for the Oktava. So keep that in mind when considering the price and the quality, or even like value of the microphone. And I definitely love the Oktava, but can the Lewitt come to a certain point where the price is acceptable for the quality? Meaning that I'll spend a little less to maybe work on the back end and give it some oomph. But we're going to find out where it lands in this whole booth, voiceover, interior dialogue, or whatever it is. Let's figure it out. But first, let's go into the build. And comparatively speaking, I like the build of the Oktava better. Now, this makes sense because the Oktava is a higher quality microphone, price and build. The metal is definitely a nice touch with the brushed look, and I feel that the Lewitt is nice, but for the price, you're going to have to cut some corners, and I feel like it's a little cheap comparatively speaking. It is a nice build, it's really well made, but I do feel like it's cheap, quote unquote, compared to the Oktava, which makes sense. Now let's get into some techie talk where I talk about the tech, the specs, and everything that goes into these things technologically, electronically, and all inside of it. But first, I will leave up a graphic of all the tech and specs. I'm going to talk about the specific things that I think are mostly important when it comes to using the microphone, and then I'll talk about the frequency response curve. And if you've been here before, you know how I feel. The frequency response curve is the most important thing about a microphone because it shows how the microphone was tuned. Just how I feel. Let's get into it. So the first thing that stands out with these microphones is the fact that the Oktava does have multiple patterns. You can put on different capsules and it will allow you to record in different polar patterns. The Lewitt only has a cardioid. It's fixed, that's it. So keep that in mind when you're investing in this microphone. If you just get the cardioid for the Oktava, it's going to be cheaper, but it's certainly not as cheap as the Lewitt. Now, as far as max SPL, the Lewitt comes in at 134.6 decibels, and the Oktava comes in at 130. So a higher SPL for the Lewitt. And this is understandable because I feel like this microphone, the Lewitt, has been known to be used more ruggedly, for lack of better terms, as much as I've used the Oktava, and it's definitely durable. But I definitely notice a sensitivity to the capsule, and it definitely is, how should I put this? I'm more weary of overloading it than the Lewitt. Maybe it's because of the price, maybe it's because of the investment, I don't know, but I definitely notice some I don't know. Just it gets me on edge. A little bit of that Sixth Sense kind of thing saying don't screw it up. Don't mess with it too much. Don't put that gain too high. But that's just me, and maybe it's because of the price. Now, lastly in techie talk, the frequency response curve, and the Oktava has 3 of them. But that's based on the different polar patterns. We're just going to focus right on the cardioid because it's easy to compare them, and I don't want to weigh it one way or another in the frequency response curve. I know I have extra ones with the Oktava, but to be fair, I'm going to do it this way. So starting off with the Lewitt, we have a low end that's like a natural low cutoff, and it goes up to about 80 to 100, and it starts to plateau as it goes into the low mids, into the mids. Now this could be good if you're not looking to do too much on that low end and it does it naturally, but you do have to keep in mind that it's not as emphasized. Granted, most of those tones are not really used, so keep that in mind as well. Now to the Oktava's low end, and I'm referencing the ones that came with me, the hand-drawn ones, which I thought was very cool, and I still think is very cool. I think more people should try and do this, but that's just the way I feel. I have a little bit of a, I don't know, like that hands-on feel is really nice. So it looks like it's got a dip and then high boost in that low end, and the boost is between 0 and 50. I don't know why it's boosted that much, but that's the way they have it. Then there's a valley between 40 and about like 75 with a rise after that. It rises from about 75 to about, let's say 125. Peak again at around 150. Valley right after that, and then rise to 200. And that is your low end pretty much up till 200, maybe 250 or so. And I don't know how accurate this is. It is hand drawn, so it's a little bit more finicky. But I could definitely say that if it was done this specific, it probably is pretty accurate to the microphone that I have. Not necessarily to every microphone that they make, but generically, I don't think it applies. I think it really is just for this one. So, give or take, I'm just going off of what I have, just so you know. I'll leave a picture of this up, obviously, in the graphics that I'm putting up. Now, as we move to the midsection, the Lewitt has a pretty flat midsection, slight rise from about 100 to about like 300, and then flattens out as we go into the mids and high mids, and pretty flat, like I said, pretty nice. Now, we have the midsection here, which has a steady rise up until like 700 or so, and then starts to dip back down, but it's really flat. It's like flat in the sense that it doesn't fluctuate too much more than a decibel or two. So in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty flat, but it does have some bumps here and there. Now finally, the high end, which is where you get your presence boosts. And we have a rise from about like 1.5K to about 5K, and it starts to rise up there, pretty steady, little bump there around 3K, and then rises up again to a slight boost after that around 7, 8, 10, in that range there. The Oktava has a similar thing going on, but it's definitely not as boosted in that section. It's pretty neutral, and I do, as far as the sound is concerned, like the low end on this microphone, and it's really nice to have that presence, and it actually complements the 416, my Sennheiser, very well. So if you're doing a movie, that Oktava and the 416 definitely are good to work with and keep things pretty consistent with your recordings. There is a Sennheiser small diaphragm condenser that I'm hoping to get one day, but it is a little expensive, so I'm gonna have to consider that at a later date if my life allows it. So as far as the charts are concerned, based on the chart, not necessarily how it sounds, the Lewitt has an upper hand. I feel like it's more clean, and of course the drawn one is much different than the one that is generic on the website, but I am going off of the one for this specific model, the one that they drew for this model. I can't guarantee it for everyone, but that's definitely how I feel that it's more clean. And that could be fudged, that could be just them generically throwing out a frequency response, but that's how I see it, and that's how it is. And even if it's like fudged a little bit, it's not really enough to say, oh, it's not boosted in the high end, or it's not cut off in the low end. You definitely hear those things, and they represent it well. It's just how much, how many decibels, and what specific frequency is it exact. So if I was to give a percentage on how accurate they are, I'd say about 75 to 85% accurate. So that's just my opinion, and that's how I feel about with these frequency responses. But the Lewitt definitely has an upper hand with that. So we're pretty much tied at this point. Now, let's do a noise test and an off-axis rejection test before we go into the booth and see how these things fare as a voiceover microphone, which the Lewitt definitely surprised me in the solo video. So I'm going to be quiet for a bit. The mini fridge is going off, so keep that in mind as well. It's kind of in like kind of 180, maybe actually it's more so 90 degrees to it or so. So other than the mini fridge, there really wasn't many things going on. I turned off the dehumidifier, which is in the other room, and I turned off my fan, so you don't have much noise. I did boost it a little bit in post. I put it up in the corner, but for the most part, the only noise that I have is that mini fridge. So if you are in a situation where there's a fan going on, or if there's a air conditioning unit, this could be a similar situation if you're doing a film or doing an interview or whatever it is. Now let's do some off-axis stuff, and the first thing we're going to do is a distance. So I've been roughly about like a foot, maybe even like a foot and a little bit away from the microphones right now. Booms right here. And now I'm about like 3, maybe 2.5 feet away from the microphones, and you're getting more of the room. I don't have as much treatment up right now. I've been going back to my old school way of doing things, the way the channel was originally, because I feel like it takes away from the booth tests, and it's not as drastic of a difference. So keep that in mind when you listen to these tests. Now I'm going to do the 90 degrees. Okay, about a foot away from the Oktava right now on this side. And this is what it's going to sound like with the 90 degree test. I'm speaking towards my monitors and some reflective surfaces, so keep that in mind when you're listening to this test. Now I'm on the Lewitt side, and this is what it's going to sound like. Remember, these are cardioid polar patterns, speaking towards my shelves with a bunch of stuff on them, so keep that in mind. A lot of stuff will not reverberate back, but it is some reverberation of just the room. There is moving blankets and sound blankets on the ceiling, so that could dampen some of the sound as well. Now lastly, 180 degrees roughly. So this is what it's going to sound like with the 180 degree test between the Lewitt and the Oktava. Alright, so we're using the microphones in the booth right now in a situation where these microphones are probably not going to be known for. This is not going to be a situation where these microphones are going to be prominent in their use case. But I do feel like you should get the most out of your gear. That was probably one of the most common things when I first started this channel, and getting the most out of your gear is the foundation for this channel, the Rebel Tech channel, and knowing that just because something's made for a certain use case, doesn't mean that you can't use it for something else. And I'm all about like getting the most value out of things, so this ties into that as well. So right now I'm listening to the Lewitt LCT 040 match, and I mentioned in the solo video that I really do like this thing in the booth. At this distance and with this setup, I actually really like it naturally. Obviously, nothing has been altered, and this is natural. And this booth is roughly about 4x4 or so, give or take. And it's not a great booth. It's not the perfect booth. I mean, there obviously are better situations, but for what I have and for the price that I paid, not that bad. So we have two, what's it called? Sound blankets, that's the word, and then 2 moving blankets. I'm considering getting another sound blanket for that back part, but I mean, if I need it. I think if I want to make it bigger, I'm going to get another one. If not, then I'm just going to keep it the way it is, because that wall right there is a wall to the foundation of the house, so I really don't need much. It's nothing fancy. This, I wanted to have a little bit more, and I'm going to be speaking this way, so the reverberation back, I think, is better, or lack thereof, I should say. So let's move to the Oktava right now, and oh, wow, that low end just starts to, like, you notice like a scoop in the middle and a low end presence. You let me know if it's the lowering of the midsection that makes that low end more present, or is it a boost in the low end that makes it more present rather than the Lewitt, which seems a little bit like, when you listen to that, it sounds muddy and kind of like nasally. But now when I go to this, it's much more clean. And the price and the quality is showing right now. It's night and day. Now, granted, this microphone setup with the cardioid polar pattern is roughly about $250 or so. This is about $100. And this is not the use case. This is not the style that you would, or I guess use case is probably the best way to put it. This is not the type of thing you would be recording with the Lewitt. But keep an open mind when it comes to deciding on a microphone like this. And this is something that I noticed with the Oktava. Its quality is much higher than its price point makes it out to be. And I feel that about the Lewitt as well, but I don't think it reaches the level of the Oktava, at least right now. So, without any further ado, let's go into the plosive test. And this is not something that I want to go too crazy with because they are sensitive, but let's do it. Okay, both the SE Electronics and the windscreen. Just the windscreen. It's okay. Nude. SE and nude. And yeah, that's it. I think that's it. All right, Oktava. Both. Just the windscreen. Ooh. Oh my God. I'm not even going to go any further. So, back on the Oktava with the plosive test, use protection. That's all I got to say. Use protection. Because these things are very sensitive. And the diaphragm, I get very nervous with this diaphragm on this Oktava. And possibly using the 10 dB pad might be beneficial, but I don't know, maybe. If you have any opinions on that, if you think that the 10 dB pad would be beneficial using on the regular, if you have preamps that could support it to help not overload the capsule, let me know. But if it's not a big deal and just make sure I get my levels right, then cool, then it's fine. I have a feeling that it's just get my levels right and then don't worry about it. Don't blow into it and stuff like that. Maybe get a bigger windscreen if I was to use it in a situation where I'm going to be having it on a boom or whatever it is. Because there is airflow still happening, so keep that in mind. Sean, he mentioned in his audio bag video that he puts a windscreen on even indoors because there is airflow. There's still air flowing through a room. And I didn't really think, I kind of knew it in the back of my mind, but I didn't really think about it until he mentioned it. And it's one of those things like it's there, but you don't notice it until someone points it out. So I appreciate that. So before we get out of here, the booth, I mean, we're going to do a close proximity off-axis. These are cardioid, just so you know, and a little reminder. And I've been about like 2-3 inches away. All right, so this is 90 degrees closer to the Lewitt, closer to the Oktava, but this is the Lewitt I'm listening to. This is what it's going to sound like with the 90 degrees. And I think it has some decent off-axis. Now to the Oktava. Oh, it's night and day. Man, it's pretty good, I got to admit. Okay, 180 degrees, Oktava. Cardioid polar pattern. This is what it's going to sound like in close proximity. And the Lewitt, 180 degrees. And you notice that it's definitely not as rejecting as the Oktava is. Okay, so as far as the boot's concerned, the Oktava is night and day, sound quality-wise. But I was kind of expecting that, but this is like much more than I was expecting. This is a wider gap than I was expecting. Not to say anything really bad about the Lewitt, but it's not what it's made for. This has potential for this, but this has some work. Let me know what you think down in the comments of what you hear, and we're going to go to the untreated room and do some tests in there. And where these microphones, I think, are going to shine, especially compared to a shotgun microphone. Okay, so we're in the untreated room with the Lewitt LCT 040 match and the Oktava MK012. Small diaphragm condenser microphones, cardioid polar patterns for both of them. The Oktava has two other ones, as I mentioned before, but for this we're using the cardioid. So to keep things simple, and to keep things fair also, but also know that there are two more that go along with it. Interchangeable. And the Lewitt only has one. There's no interchangeable anything. I guess if you really are ambitious enough, you could do it, but for me, in my feeble mind, I definitely can't. So it's going to sound like in the untreated room, my bedroom, a long, narrow room, and you have a flat ceiling. Most places have flat ceilings, but it's flat. And flat wall behind it, above a couple of shelves, so keep that in mind. It's like shelves and then flat above it. And then behind me there's a flat wall with shelves over there, flat over here. Just a little lay of the land. Area rug underneath me and my bed behind me. So now you know what I'm dealing with a little bit of an audio sample to go along with it. So what we're going to do now is a distance test. I'm going to go a little bit further back than I did in my last distance test. And we're going to do 90s and 180. Now keep in mind that these microphones are definitely used for these situations, boomed. And because with a shotgun microphone, if you saw the AT875R shotgun and the comparison between that and the MKH416 Sennheiser, you might have noticed some phase delay in those videos. These are supposed to avoid that. They won't have as much rejection with a cardioid polar pattern, but they definitely will have less phase delay if that does happen in an untreated room like this, or a reverberant room. So let's back up and see how they are. Okay, about 6 feet away from the fronts of the microphones is what it's going to sound like in the untreated room. I could hear a little bit of the reverberation, but the microphones are certainly going to pick up a lot more than I'm hearing myself, because they're microphones. They're supposed to hear that. And this is what it's going to sound like I said, 6 feet away, and I'm just trying to figure out things to say to fill up some time and give you a good audio sample. Next up, 90 degrees to both microphones, and this is what it's going to sound like in the untreated room. Flat ceiling. I'm a little closer to the wall on my left side, or behind the camera technically, so that might be a little reverberant, but it is in that dead zone, well, quote-unquote dead zone, the rejection zone of the cardioid polar pattern. So keep that in mind when you're listening to this. Lastly, 180 degrees, I flipped the microphones behind, turned the beat around, that whole thing. It might be actually there probably is some reverberation back to the front of the microphone, but there's not much I could do about that. I'm just trying my best to give you an audio sample of 180 degrees with a voice or some sound going towards the butt end of it and the most rejection of the microphone. Alright, so that's our untreated room test. I'm going to give this a listen, do some edits, and see what I think, and let you know in the outro, which is going to happen instantaneously for you, but it's going to take a while for me. So, see you in the future. Alright, so I listened to it, I listened to the comparison, and the Oktava is a landslide of a winner. And I'm not going to say that the Lewitt didn't show good signs of quality, but I will say that it definitely needs some work. Now, that makes sense when it comes to the application. That microphone is not necessarily used for spoken word or even interior dialogue. That microphone is usually marketed as a acoustic guitar microphone. That's what I've seen it marketed as, like a stereo setup or whatever it is. And it has potential. And the only place that I see it having potential is in a controlled environment at a close proximity, which a booth and voiceover could be a place to put it. But the problem is, at that price point, there are so many other microphones that fit that criteria, like the AT2020, the Blue Ember, the Pod Mic, and a bunch of other microphones that are around that $100 mark that you're probably going to get better quality out of. And that is why I think that this was a good experiment. It was a tough one to do because I almost was going into it saying, I know how this is going to work. I know how this is going to come out. I know what I'm going to say in the outro. But I wanted to prove it. And I definitely showed that the LCT 040 match can have a place within a spoken word world. Now, the Oktava, on the other hand, this thing sounds incredible. A little bit excessive sometimes on that low end, depending on how you set it up. But as a boomed over microphone, and especially voiceover, if you like this as a voiceover microphone, I would highly recommend it if you can afford it. Now, I saw the price, and it's definitely gone up since the last time I got it. I think it's like closer to like $400 or $500 now, and depending on the package you get, will determine how expensive it is. Is it worth it? Depends on your use case. If you're going to use it for client work and short films and stuff like that, for interior stuff, for reflective surfaces, sure. Get the hypercardioid polar pattern. Maybe even get the cardioid polar pattern. I recommend the hyper because it's just a good microphone for rejection of noise outside that sweet spot, or the front spot. The sweet spots are the rejection noise spots. But regardless, I recommend this as a technically budget interior dialogue small diaphragm condenser microphone, because comparatively speaking, there are Sennheisers out there that cost well over $1,000. And in this market, in the interior dialogue and interview style, professional style, this microphone is still budget when you compare it to other stuff. So Oktava wins this. Not really a surprise, but it was a fun experiment. Let me know what you think about this whole video, this whole experiment, and how it went. Did you find it to be surprising? Did you find it to be just, hey, this is what I expected? I was just curious to see what would happen. So thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you liked the video, please hit the like button down below. It'd be greatly appreciated. Helps this video, helps this channel. And if you have any questions, comments, or anything whatsoever down in the comments section, all I ask is that you be nice and let's have a conversation. One last thing, if you like my vibe around here, please consider subscribing. As far as I can tell right now, we are right on the cusp of 2,000 subscribers. I hope, fingers crossed, that I can do a 24-hour live stream to celebrate the 2,000 subscribers, but I gotta find the right day and find the right time. So hopefully by the end of the month, I will do that. And it might coincide with Halloween, but I don't think so. But I'll be doing a stream on Halloween, playing some scary games and stuff like that if you guys want to hang out. I might start streaming again. Don't know. I have a lot of stuff going on, so I've been missing it. I know that I said that I didn't want to do it anymore because it was kind of boring, but now I've kind of missed it. So let's see what happens. I'm going to give the 24-hour live stream and the Halloween stream a chance, and then I'll make a decision in November if I decide to go back to weekly streams. And that's all I got for you. Once again, thank you all for watching, and until next time, take care, and I will see you rebels in the next video.